Strategists often say, before you go to war, you should think about how you get out. What's your exit strategy? If you're going on a raid, where's your helicopter to take you home? You don't just go charging in on the odd hope that you can leave. Well, we got involved with Ukraine without any such plan. And yes, we're not at war with Russia. We haven't declared war. We don't have any declared troops on the ground. There's nothing going on. However, by any normal definition, if you're supplying weapons, if you're supplying shells, if you're handing over your fighter jets, your tanks, your entire stock of artillery, then you are very close to being a combatant. Before the Second World War, that would have just been called being at war, and you would have been fair game. Now we've made it clear what side we're on, and you could argue that we've been happy for Ukraine to run as a proxy war. It's rather harsh on the poor Ukrainians who have to take the rain of steel 24 hours a day and have lost huge numbers of dead and injured. But the war continues, and it continues fueled by the West. Now, people think Trump's a bit mean in some of the things he says, and in some I might even agree. But he does raise a very valid question when he says, why is Europe buying Russian oil? Literally, the countries that are sending tanks, military advisors, artillery, anti-air weapons, aircraft, everything they can get their hands on, those same people are fueling Russia's war machine by buying Putin's fuel. In what world is that saying? We're effectively supporting both sides. Well, some of Europe are. If we compare the two Iraq wars, the first Iraq war, the goal was defined. It was to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And it was achieved, and that is what you could call a successful war. It was a very high price for the Kurds who rose up and believed that the West would support them and their right for statehood, or at least survival, and got gassed in return whilst we did nothing. But we knew what meant winning, and when we won, we finished. If you look at the second Gulf War, there was no real strategy. It was just go in, smash, smash. And it was a very effective assault. There was a very effective period of war. And then we had mission accomplished on the aircraft carrier. And then we had 20 years of, well, it wasn't war, was it? Because the war was over. But it wasn't very good. And then the West left and the country collapsed around its own head. But we also had Libya, where the aim was to get rid of Gaddafi. We got rid of Gaddafi, and hasn't that country done well? Oh, no, it hasn't, has it? Because we didn't do it with any understanding or concept of what a victory should look like, and really an understanding of why. Just a, hoorah, I'm going to be a war leader. We're going to solve the world's problems. Well, when Ukraine kicked off, we had no doubts what side we were on. We also had no actual legal contractual treaty obligations to get involved. It's not surprising that Russia wants Crimea, and it's not surprising that Ukraine is scared of Russia. I mean, frankly, Russia's proved why Ukraine needs to be scared of Russia many times over throughout this war, from day one. Whilst we're often bombarded with messages of how Ukraine is going to somehow win this war, or is winning this war, the sad fact seems to be that the same state of play exists as did a year ago, that we're giving Ukraine enough weapons to keep fighting, so they can't really lose, but short of us actually getting involved, they can't win. Against a vastly numerically superior force, how are they going to defeat Russia? Well, Russia also can't afford to lose. It would be pretty bad for Putin if they lost. So instead, they just keep fighting. So no one has a game plan of what victory looks like and how to get there. Yet we keep funding and supplying the war to keep it going. It's probably too late now to have a definition of what victory looks like, because what victory looks like won't really be very palatable. And Trump's plan for Ukraine is certainly not palatable for Ukraine. How could they accept having a limit on the size of their army when they have such a belligerent, antagonistic bully next door with such a large military? The idea that they never join NATO, well, perhaps that's not such a bad thing. NATO doesn't need to grow until it's a one world government, democracies versus the rest. It needs to be a defence pact between countries that share common values. One of those common values is not being massively corrupt. We had Turkey ready to join the EU at the beginning of the 2000s. We had a team of about 40 people in Britain whose sole job for 30 years was making sure that they were ready for Turkey joining. Well, Turkey's never going to be invited to join the EU. And because they never were, they've now become a country that we never would invite. Since we're no longer members of the EU, it's probably not for me to suggest that EU membership might be the route to go. Peace agreement seems to be a rather bitter pill for Ukraine to swallow, and it's very sad to see them forced to gag on these kind of terms. But at some point, we have to be honest and decide what is the war aims, what is the limit of support, because no support is limitless, as Russia will find out from their Chinese friends one day soon. There is a limit, and for the good of the Ukrainian people, collectively there has to be a decision on what that is. And it should be one they can live with. But the West, although we might not have technically been competent, have sent more than enough money and weaponry that we have a moral responsibility to help ensure that peace. I'm watching a video by a military strategist who talked about how old men are always happy to send young men away to fight wars and die, because they're not the ones dying. But we have to accept that proxy wars, or whatever fancy name you want to give it, have a price that's paid, and it's paid in the blood of the people of that country that fights the conflict. And any meaningful peace deal has to come with guarantees, because Ukraine clearly does have something to be worried about with Russia. Might not be very popular, but I think after the last 3 years, it's time for us to say they'll never join NATO, but that NATO will provide meaningful security guarantees.